Emily's wedding was already in full swing when Jessica walked in, elegant, poised, and calm as ever. No one expected her to be there, much less standing at the head of the room. As the new owner of the entire venue, her sister's mouth fell open. Her mother dropped her fork mid-bite. And Jessica? She simply smiled and said, "I thought it was time someone gave me a seat at the main table." But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with gold filigree, clearly expensive, clearly meant to impress. Jessica held it in her hands a moment longer than necessary, the weight of its contents heavier than paper alone could justify. She already knew what it was. She'd seen the engagement photos splashed across social media, had heard through a mutual cousin that Emily's wedding was being touted as the social event of the season, but no one had actually spoken to her about it. No phone call, no warm message, just this sterile, showy piece of stationery. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened the envelope with a practiced finger. Out slid the RSVP card, the menu options, and the seating assignment, typed, not handwritten. Table 19, overflow, cousins, plus ones, mice. Jessica blinked, then read it again. The phrase was wrapped in parentheses, as if she, a 42-year-old woman who had once taken out a second mortgage to save Emily from bankruptcy, was now part of some faceless collective of distant, irrelevant guests. Miscellaneous. That word throbbed behind her eyes. She hadn't expected warmth, but this? This was clinical, dismissive, a cut so precise it left her stunned. She stood, the card trembling in her fingers, and walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine, not because she needed it, but because the ritual grounded her. Around her, the apartment whispered with curated stillness. Clean lines, neutral tones, framed sketches from Parisian flea markets. Every object had been chosen with intention, every detail telling a story of self-sufficiency. She had built this life from the ground up, without handouts or strings. Yet here she was, still being treated like the family's afterthought. It wasn't the first time. Jessica had always lived in quiet contrast to her siblings. David, the flashy stockbroker with 3 divorces behind him, and Emily, the golden child who could do no wrong. Their parents loved theater, and Emily had always been the star. Jessica? She was stage crew. Behind the curtain, backstage, useful only when something needed fixing. She picked up the card again and turned it over. No note. No scribbled, "Can't wait to see you," from her sister. Just pre-printed font and an RSVP deadline. Even the stationery had more personality than the gesture itself. Jessica didn't cry. She hadn't cried over her family in years. But in that moment, something inside her calcified. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. It wasn't that they didn't see her. It was that they didn't want to. And that, she realized, was the last time she would ever let them seat her in the shadows. The silence after her mother's sigh was louder than anything Jessica could recall from their long, brittle history. It wasn't just what her mother said, it was how casually she said it, how effortlessly she brushed Jessica aside with that syrupy, patronizing tone that always masked something colder underneath. "It's Emily's day." That single phrase echoed like a verdict. It always had to be someone else's day. David's graduation, Emily's engagement, her father's retirement, her mother's charity galas. Jessica, the dependable one, the self-made one, was only ever allowed the scraps of acknowledgement, rarely celebrated, always useful, and never truly seen. She didn't call back. She didn't text. She didn't even allow herself the release of screaming into a pillow like she had when she was 17 and her prom dress was accidentally hemmed too short by her mother's friend. Instead, Jessica lit a single candle on her windowsill, poured a double measure of bourbon into a heavy crystal glass, and stared out over the dark Manhattan skyline. The city had never ignored her. It demanded hustle, but it paid back in respect, something her family had never learned to offer. She could have skipped the wedding, sent a terse reply, and gone to Montauk for the weekend. But that felt too much like retreat. Jessica didn't retreat. The restaurant gleamed with the kind of old-world charm that smelled like polished mahogany and money. Chandeliers dripped overhead like frozen tears, and soft jazz wrapped itself around clinking silverware and murmured pleasantries. Jessica stepped in, composed and regal in her navy silk dress, her only jewelry a single pearl, a gift to herself after her first six-figure design job. No one came to greet her. A hostess wordlessly led her past the main hall, past the floral arch where the newlyweds had just kissed, past tables adorned with linen napkins folded into swans, until they reached the back. Table 19 was tucked between the service hallway and the emergency exit. The centerpiece was wilted. Her name card was handwritten, slightly smudged. Her seat wobbled. Next to her sat a half-deaf cousin who spent the evening confusing her for someone named Julie. Jessica tried to eat, but her appetite drowned in the rising acidity in her throat. Then came the toasts. Emily's voice, giggling and bright, rang out as she thanked her core family, eyes darting toward the main tables. David raised his glass with a smug wink. Her father praised Emily's resilience through life's trials, conveniently forgetting who had paid those trials away. And then, Jessica caught it. A glance. A barely stifled laugh from Emily's friend, whispered words behind a manicured hand. The look wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was pity. Jessica didn't wait for dessert. She rose, slow and silent, threading her way between white tablecloths and golden chairs. She didn't look back as she handed her valet ticket to the young man in the red blazer. The night air slapped her with its honesty. It was over. But something inside her had shifted, not shattered, not cracked, solidified, cold, clean, and clear as crystal. Jessica disappeared, but not in the way people expected. She didn't go off-grid or post vague quotes about cutting ties. She simply stopped responding. No replies to group chats, no heart reactions to photos of Emily and her husband on the Amalfi Coast. She watched silently from the periphery as her absence was edited out of captions and conversations, as if she'd never been there at all. She channeled her energy with surgical focus. It wasn't revenge she was after. Not exactly. What she wanted was precision, ownership, dignity, a setting she could control down to the last shade of linen. Nathan picked up on the second ring. "You still thinking about that place in Charleston?" Jessica's voice was calm. Not thinking, buying. It was, as he'd said once over drinks, a stunning venue with poor management. The kind of historic property that dazzled on the outside, brick walls, arched windows, vintage chandeliers, but was quietly bleeding money from within. Jessica didn't flinch at the numbers. She ran projections, studied floor plans, called in favors from contractors and chefs she trusted. She didn't need investors. She needed control. And 2 weeks after wiring the down payment, the deed was in her name. She returned to the restaurant for the first time under new ownership on a rainy Tuesday. It was empty. Quiet. She walked past the table where she had once been seated with the miscellaneous, her heels echoing against the hardwood like punctuation marks in a speech she was finally ready to deliver. In the corner, she paused. The chair was still wobbly. She didn't fix it. Not yet. The renovation took 5 weeks. She replaced the dull carpeting with dark oak, changed the overhead lighting to create warmth instead of glare, restructured the kitchen, redesigned the wine wall. The bathrooms were redone. The garden path was extended and illuminated with fairy lights that made it feel like walking into a secret. Every inch bore her fingerprint, But her masterpiece wasn't architectural, it was strategic. She began with Emily's in-laws, invited them personally for a preview dinner with the new chef. They came expecting novelty and left astonished. The menu was divine, the decor elegant, the service flawless. They asked who owned it now. Jessica only smiled and handed them personalized thank you notes with gold foil lettering. Within days, the Monroes were abuzz. Rumors trickled back. Something about Jessica's new place, about people raving. Then came the invitation, embossed on cream cardstock. Grand reopening, hosted by the owner. There was no return address, just a name at the bottom. Jessica Monroe. The sky that evening burned with streaks of gold and rose as the Monroe family pulled into the cobblestone drive, their expensive shoes clicking awkwardly on the uneven stones as they approached the familiar building, though something about it now felt unfamiliar, elevated, cleaner, sharper. The once dusty sconce lights had been replaced by wrought iron lanterns that cast warm halos across the brick facade. Someone had cared here, someone with taste, someone with purpose. Jessica waited at the entrance like a curator unveiling a long-lost painting. She wore a tailored white pantsuit lined with gold-threaded embroidery, not ostentatious, but commanding. Her posture was effortless, spine straight, chin high, the same pearl she had worn to the wedding now gleaming softly at her throat. She didn't speak first. Her parents faltered, uncertain whether to embrace her or avoid her altogether. Her mother's hands fluttered mid-air, unsure whether they were being offered a greeting or a warning. Emily stood back, clutching her bag like a shield, confusion and calculation battling behind her carefully painted eyes. "You bought it?" she whispered, as if saying it too loud might make it real. Jessica didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I did. Thought I'd try owning a venue where family actually gets a seat at the main table." The words hung like crystal shards, polished, cutting, refracting unspoken truths. Inside, the restaurant had transformed. The lighting was soft, the air scented with rosemary and lemon zest. A jazz trio played in the corner. The table settings were minimalist but refined. Linen napkins folded like sculpture, menus printed in calligraphy. Each place card bore a name. Each guest had a view of the center. There was no table 19. Jessica was the perfect hostess, attentive but distant, warm in tone but cool in substance. She made polite conversation, refilled glasses, asked no questions she cared to hear answered. Her siblings laughed too loudly, trying to compensate for the rising unease. Her mother complimented the drapes. Her father asked if she was seeing anyone now. Jessica only smiled. Then, as the final dessert course was cleared, honey-poached pears over almond cream, she stood. The room fell into immediate hush. "This place used to mean something to me," she began, her voice calm and unshakable, "until it became the backdrop for something uglier. A reminder that some ties bind us only to the versions of ourselves others refuse to let go of." She glanced around, not accusatory, just honest. "Tonight isn't about forgiveness. It's about authorship. Owning the page you were once erased from, even if it means buying the building to do it." Silence followed. Dense. Heavy. Her father shifted. Her mother's lips parted, then closed. Emily stared into her wine, cheeks flushed with something more than embarrassment. Jessica didn't wait for applause. She stepped away from the table and let the quiet speak for her. Later, long after the guests had gone, she stood alone by the doorway, locking the glass-paneled doors with a quiet click. Outside, the lanterns flickered like stars. Inside, the room waited in stillness. Hers now, completely. Here are the detailed mid-journey visual scenarios for each of the 4 episodes. Each scene focuses on the most emotionally charged moment, includes full character descriptions, emotional expressions, environment, color palette, lighting, and social context where relevant.